because from my understanding, right, like what is repressed, it's not that like it's something that just like because Freud has like primary repression and secondary repression, but like the secondary repression comes with all the defense mechanisms and culture and stuff like that. But then there is the primary repression that it's just like there's so much of like libidinal excess that comes before the development of like speech and language and all that stuff. So I wonder if we're getting at this sort of excess that failed to be symbolized, but also it fails to be sublimated as well. So that's why it can't be in the pleasure principle.
Fails to be sublimated. And it, Zizek here says that it's actually that excess that is strangely like prior to everything else, though.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why Freud calls it primary repression because it's prior to everything else, right?
Like the excess that we get as if you think about like the miscellaneous category, Slavoj's whole example of like the different trash cans and then
Right.
just waste. You would think, okay, well, that's after the fact. Everything that doesn't go into these other receptacles goes in here. But the paradox of Hegel and Lacan in this regard is that actually that waste, that miscellaneous category, comes first.
Yeah.
We get the separation.
Yeah. Zizek in the trash cans. My God, you call this porn?
Oh, this is pornography. Oh my God. Oh,
It's the best.
it's so hilarious. They just have like scrounging around in a dump.
Yeah.
Like,
But like these gestures that people just find funny and hilarious, it's like they don't get the whole structure of what he's getting at. It's like these are perfect like capitalist or like ideology critique of understanding psychoanalysis and how the excess and repression or from our jouissance has a materiality that takes on a life of its own in the symbolic order of capitalism. And
right.
it's like when we come to recognize it, we disavow it. And in a sense, it's like because he's bringing it in a form that is approachable, it could be one realized, and paradoxically, it can also be disavowed because we
Well,
come too close to our fantasy. And
yeah,
it's like it's this.
but that's a question that's always on my mind, which is like we think from a Reichian point of view that society is built on repression. And Lacan himself says, well, the family is a product of repression in television. But then it seems like though capitalism has more to do with disavowal, though,
Well,
which is
so
like
yeah,
that's something that can be that with all you need to do is just like take a step back in a corny kind of way and like see, just look at what you're looking at and see it as like unfamiliar, and then you see what's disavowed. um but like it doesn't seem as strong as repression. Why is it
right.
a society of disavowal rather than a society of repression?
Well, the thing is that if we take capital and its logic as perversion, that there is a sort of inversion of neurosis with perversion, and perversion does have repression to it. But the thing is that what disavow does is it exacerbates that. Even though I know, I still believe, right, that the idealization that I have and the certainty of jouissance that I get from it is more powerful, and I
Right.
enjoy more than with the negative reality. That's the thing about perversion is that they know exactly what they're doing, but they believe something different.
Right, because it can be mobilized. That's why it's perverse.
Exactly. In a
It
sort
can
of
be
cruel
mobilized in a way you
way.
can't mobilize repression, because repression only through analysis, or maybe not only through analysis, I mean it returns on its own, but you can, part of the fun and the game of being in a subject of capitalism is to like what you choose to disavow, when you choose to disavow it. You're not always disavowing it. There are moments when, like, based on unwritten rules, you're called upon to like to avow something that you would otherwise disavow. So that makes more sense. If it's just a society of repression, then it would mean that, like, oh, if we got more in touch with our sexual instincts and they were allowed an outlet that was
Right.
socially acceptable in a way that accounted for every shade and hue of sexuality, then society would be less violent,
But
less cruel.
the problem of like of right, and even Marcuse takes this up, and then like DNG, is that they confuse repression with suppression and domination.
Right.
Whereas like repression is something that acts primordially within the subject, you know, on its own as a defense mechanism, but also because it just can't symbolize all this excess, right? Because we have to think about the subject as polymorphously perverse. And through language, right, there's the mapping of like the limits of jouissance, but that excess that doesn't get accounted for, right? That is what's repressed. It's the secondary aspect of repression is tied in with the family structure, with society, with norms. And in some cases, it could tie in with suppression and domination, depending on the type of society. But there is a primary repression for Freud. I'm not sure if
Right.
Lacan takes this on, but like I would imagine this makes sense, especially when we talk about the polymorphous perversity aspect of it.
There's a difference between, yeah, suppression or social repression, and then Verdrängung, as like,
Yes,
that's
the
why
imprint.
Hansich prefers Verdrängung to describe the kind of primary repression, which is like you said, yeah, the social structures, or edibilizing structures, if we want to give Dilla some credit here, whatever. Like, yeah, society can be like operate in that way, but it can't. Society can't be the agent of primary repression necessarily. It can't be
Exactly.
like a
And
bunch of guys, like in a bunch of like old white crusty men, like in a boardroom somewhere, being like, all right, here's how we're going to repress everybody. It's like, it
exactly.
doesn't work that
And
way.
the thing is that they also think that repression is not just like social repression, but that the key to fighting off repression or domination is that if everybody was having sex more, or expressing themselves in these practices, like in the Foucauldian, Reichian, bust a nut type shit, like things would be better. But it's the fact is that we are doing that today, and the amount of that like commodities and marketing that sex has, you know, is through the roof compared to like the traditional Victorian society and feudalism. The point is that sex is a failure not of the act, but in the amount of enjoyment, right? The deadlocks
Right.
of enjoyment. It has nothing to do with practices and kinks and fetishes.
Right, because that's like you were talking about the other night with Freud's Freud's homie, who was like, well, without that, life wouldn't have much
Right.
meaning, right? Because it becomes it stands as like the end all be all of existence. Like, it's the enjoyment, like metonymically
Right.
displaced. It's like that is the enjoyment of all
Right.
enjoyments. Um,
And that's why it's not about the act, it's about the fantasy that comes with it.
right. Um, cool. Should we end it there?
There.